As I listened yesterday to you, and I realized how academic you are and how what elevated levels of expertise you have in your field, I'm almost apologetic about my field, that it's very practical. This is going to be more like a workshop, and I like to believe that I wear my philosophy, which is actually to inspire. Just to inspire you to think a little bit at what you are doing from the perspective of what is technology doing to us these days, and especially to us as academics. And towards the end, hopefully, I'll send you home with a number of questions to ask yourselves and maybe to even take decisions. So I already shared about myself and how I ended up to look at technology into various aspects of life. And at one moment, I looked at technology and family. And I even have a paper on technology and family. I think it's called Family 2.0 Paradigm. But as I was trying to find a picture to introduce myself at conferences, I kept thinking what would be appropriate. So I talked with my family, and we realized that that would be very much characterizing who we are in this age. So you have there my husband, my son, my daughter, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, and the younger son, and obviously my dog as well, our dog. And that's been a number of years ago. So, and actually it's a funny story behind it, because I always wanted Christmas pictures with the family, and the family didn't want it. So it was a nightmare every time when I tried to set them up to sit down for a Christmas picture, and it usually ended up with me in tears. But when I asked my son and son-in-law to help me with this, they spent 8 hours and made a number of pictures, and they wouldn't stop until it was, perfect. So one of the other pictures that they played with at that time was this that displays some of the technology. And as I was preparing today, I said, we need an update, because that one is old technology. It's at least about 5 years ago. And if we were to do it today, we would have other stuff there. And I will definitely go home and ask my son, who is pretty much in technology, and he knows everything that's going on around, and it's pretty much his job, to redo the picture now with a baby, because we also have a grandson who is not allowed to watch any kind or to even look at any kind of technology for very good reasons. But that would have to be updated. And somehow, some would look at this and say, well, that's really weird to have a family that would relate like that. And usually in a family, you have people who are more prone and drawn to technologies and others that are less. I find that in our family, I am one of those that are more of the early adopters, and our husband is less. He's been pushed very strategically by us to adopt some of the technology, and it was for good reasons. Getting back to our issue, when talking about technology, I thought, okay, who's the audience? And then yesterday, I just put down on paper who we are here. We have Christian academics who teach in Christian universities. Some teach theology, some teach secular subject in Christian context. We have Christian academics in secular universities, some teaching secular subjects and some teaching theology. We have Christian educators in other contexts. So first of all, it's our Christianity and our academics relating in various contexts, and that definitely will impact how we relate to technology. Then we have here academics from very various backgrounds, and some are US, some are from US, where there is a strong academic life and very clearly regulated, and you know what to expect. We have Western Europe, strong and also tradition-based. And then we have people from Eastern Europe, and definitely I represent that category. So my approach would be from our perspective. And we are just coming with a communist heritage, striving to sort of get up to the standards of the Western Union or the United States. And some of the things that I will mention for you will be something like, Come on, I've heard that in, I don't know, 11th grade or first year of college. Well, you would be surprised to know that in my country, they still do not teach any of these things. I would just give an example. How many of you were taught somehow in school to blind type? To use all your fingers? You do that in the States? Never in our country. Never. We have computer classes. They would let you to play games or teach you some other stuff. Never teach you how to blind type. And that's a skill that is so basic. And I can tell you 90% of our academics are using two fingers. And they do it with speed. So I come from this background, you know, so addressing mostly some of the people who did not get these skills at the right time. And then in terms of the access and the appetite in using technology, obviously there is the access part, meaning costs. Obviously it's more difficult for us in our part of the world to have some certain technology. You have three categories, roughly. One would be the advanced users, who are the early adopters, who love technology, who are very good at it, and who very well may just take a break from this talk. Then you have circumstantial users who had to learn for their jobs, for their work. They had to learn certain things. They only learn as much as it's needed. Usually they learn from their children or hand down technology from their children, which I sometimes do. And then you have the reluctant users. And I don't know about the Western context, but I know there are this category in my country. These people, they hate technology. They use any kind of argument to tell you that actually they don't need it. They would have their secretaries typing their papers that they have handwritten. They cannot send an attachment. Maybe they can do email. Very often they cannot do it. Again, it doesn't have anything to do with their academic competence, just with their technological use of technology. And usually they also tend to downplay the importance. Now, with the next slide, I'm going to step on very dangerous territory, which is called the philosophy of technology. And I'm aware there are philosophers here. I am not a philosopher, and I would never, ever enter into any kind of philosophical debate because I'm completely incompetent. However, I discovered this framework, this matrix that helped me to explain some of the things that I have to deal with when I talk about technology. So this all belongs to Andrew Finberg, who is a philosopher of technology, so a philosopher specialized in philosophy of technology, who says when we try to answer questions about technology, what does it do to us, how does it influence, is it good, is it bad, should we adopt it or not? He says you can do that if you ask two questions, two basic questions that we have in the two dimensions of the matrix. One is, can humans actually control technology, its development, its access into our lives? And the second one is, does technology have built-in values? Or is there any connection between the means, the technology, and the ends, which is the value? Does it have moral value or not? And obviously, if you look at the matrix, if you answer no, humans cannot control technology. I mean, it develops by itself. Somebody invents something somewhere, we cannot stop it. It will develop anyway. And also say, and technology actually is not neutral. You have the determinist positive view that actually says determinism, that technology is the force that moves the society forward. The determinists usually say from this perspective that the good things, the development of society, that is actually a progression, is due to the development of technology. Obviously, if you say, yes, technology can be controlled, but in itself it doesn't have any value, this is illustrated by the people who say, guns do not kill people, only people kill people. People can control guns, so it's not a matter of the gun itself as being a problem, but of the way people use it. That would be instrumentalism. Then you have the substantivism, and this category of people tend to say that technology is autonomous, we cannot control it, it's going to develop, and it has a very bad impact on life, on society. It has moral value, and if it develops in a certain direction, it's going to destroy us. And this kind of thinking is very much behind some of the movies that have to do with dystopian society after some sort of a technological disaster that happened. Transcendence, if you know the film with Johnny Depp, it's pretty much illustrating this kind of looking at technology, the ecological activists who would do anything to stop the artificial intelligence developing, they would be the substantivists, and the other ones would be the determinists. And then obviously Andrew Finberg, he is advocating for the critical theory. And I know critical theory is a much more complex philosophical category, but for the sake of this presentation, it's pretty much saying people should set up systems to control how technology evolves, because technology ultimately will carry value. This is the position where you would say we should have boards to look at the ethics of biotechnology, of mutations, of all the others. So we should strive to have systems to control this thing. If you just look for Andrew Finberg and philosophy of technology, we'll find much more in-depth definitions of this. For me, it just helped me to give me a framework when to look at basically the good and the bad parts of technology in our academic life. And from here on, after this long introduction, we'll have just two chapters. One would be, what are the positives? What is the positive thing that technology can do to us in the academia? And the first thing that came to my mind is definitely an increased potential for the increase of the quality of research. There has never been so much access to resources, to databases, to literature. There has never in history been possible to sit at your desk, come over a reference, a book, look for it on the internet, and have it at your fingertips in less than 5 minutes. And if you can do that in Romania these days, you can imagine that you've been able to do that for a long time. And I think this is something that is not to be taken lightly, and I think as Christian academics that is a very big opportunity and also a very big responsibility, because we should strive to be the best, and we should strive to harness all the instruments that we have at hand. From this perspective, it's not only that you have access to literature that would feed you and that would show where you are compared to the others and where your subject is, but it's also an opportunity for you to publish, for you to access any kind of these databases if you take the work to get at that level where it's done. The second thing positive that I think technology brought in the academic life was integrity like never before. And I don't know about your context, but in our context, plagiarism and plagiarized PhD theses became a very big scandal. Our former prime minister had his PhD title revoked because of heavy plagiarism. A former minister of education had to resign because of plagiarism. Because he did his paper 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and he copied some Japanese bio something from Japan, and all of a sudden 20 years later everything is digitalized and it was easy to see what he did. And even the guy, he had no idea, he was informed by other people. So in '94, when I got my master's in the States, my advisor at that time, advising me on what plagiarism and how I should be careful, he said, you should be careful because if you enter into politics, somebody might look in the library here for your thesis and attack you on that. Well, they don't have to do that to go to Mississippi College anymore, because they can do it online very easily. So this brings two problems. One is your own integrity, which we don't doubt. I wouldn't even imagine that anyone here with the Christian values would ever think about that, but which you can do involuntarily by not being thorough enough with citing your sources, with not being thorough enough with documenting everything you research, to recognizing ideas to whom they belong, or even worse, not being thorough enough with your PhD students in order to make sure that what they do is correct from the academic point of view. And a resource that I have to tell you that I discovered only recently in the past few years, that it's not taught in Romania, and I'll probably start a course at PhD level on that. It's the referencing software. Again, I think it's something that for you it's very natural. You had it always. You probably learned about it in undergraduate school. They never teach that. In Romania, still any PhD thesis, it's done by hand. Every reference is written by hand. And when I discovered a few years ago Mendeley, and now when I teach my students, even today I got an email from a student who said that Mendeley was a lifesaver. You know, many from the Eastern Europe probably are not familiar with this. Can I ask for somebody that doesn't know what a referencing software is? So you all have studied in the West and know it. I think it is something that should be introduced in our schools, because it is not at this moment. Then there's obviously the productivity. The positive part of it is the productivity. And that has to do with a multitude of applications that can help us, starting from the simple word processors to the browsers and the ability to search for references and to search for information yourself, to the more sophisticated type of mind map software, or I discovered more recently OneNote, where I can put my thoughts when our thoughts are so scattered and I had them on all pieces of paper or on all kinds of things. There are so many things out there, and very often the middle type of users, the conventional users or the reluctant users, do not take the time to master those softwares that actually could improve a lot the productivity. Obviously, then there is e-learning, and that's a big issue. It could have been the subject of the discussion, but I intentionally did not do it because it is such a big area. E-learning, defined as the use of any kind of technology in the process of learning, has evolved in the past 20, 30 years, spreading in all directions and actually shaking down all the educational system. It is very complicated to advocate for it, and it is not correct to advocate against it without really having tried it. And I think the biggest problem with e-learning is that there is either a tendency to use it everywhere with everyone in every context, rather than custom adapting it to the development stage, to the type of program, and making the right mix out of it. Obviously, with it, there is a content management software that we all have to deal with in universities, and probably we all hate, that have to do with uploading our materials, with communicating with students, with the administrative part. And there's also the learning management software that has to do more with delivering content, blended learning techniques, and things that are much more complicated that look at first. And what I would like to mention only with e-learning and with education in digital age is that technology has influenced every area of life, but probably the most profound shaken one is education. And one of the reasons is that the basis of education and the sociology of education, the theory of education that we base our studies on is based on 19th, 20th century thinking. And it's based on providing education for the industrial era. Now, when we are in the post-industrial information age, there needs to be a completely rethinking of education. And unfortunately, very often people think that the rethinking of education is to put technology between the professor and the student. So basically, a lot of the e-learning just comes and say, yeah, instead of having me lecturing to you, we can put a camera between us and do it by video, or we can put some written material and do it that way. The rethinking of education has to be much more profound, going down to the needs of the new society that don't have to do anymore so much with production as they have to do with information and the use of information and the flow of information. And except for a few educational systems in some of the countries, this has not been done yet, and it's going to be difficult to change. Now, another important thing that technology brought to us is communication, and obviously as academics, communication is essential, whether it's with our students, whether it's among us, or in other kind of environments. And there are many instruments that we have out there that we can use technology to improve our communication and to stay connected. And to be very honest, as an academic developed in the last 25 years in a transitioning country like Romania, everything I am academically I owe to technology, to the access to communication, to the people that I was able to know at a distance, to networks that I was able to find. And I cannot imagine myself outside of this, as well as, for me, the internet is much more an instrument, probably also because of my subject, than the library. I am lost in the library, like many of you or other academics would be lost on the internet. So it's just a matter of adapting to whatever is needed to you. What I was looking for most of the time was hard to find in a library because there were very recent things. Now, there are also some negative effects of technology, and unless we address those, we will not be able to take the positive fruits. And one of the first negatives is the disruptions. The disruption that technology brings. And I was very embarrassed that yesterday I was one that caused disruption because I didn't realize I haven't closed my phone, and my phone rang in the middle of the meeting, and I was like this. And I couldn't understand why some notifications started to come with sound when I never had them on with sound, but it happened yesterday. So I just said I would next apologize, just point out how disruptions can come in our life. And the more notifications we enable on our phone, the more disruption we would have. And there are people who now are junkies dependent on these disruptions. And I read an article that said that the average American, obviously it was a longitudinal big study, the average American between a certain age would wake up at night about 20 times to check on their phone. So disruptions is probably one of the most difficult to deal with, because technology has moved from being on our desk or at our work, and it moved on our body, and most of us have it close to us almost throughout the day, hopefully not also throughout the night. And then the body is starting to respond. And there are a lot of theories and a lot of studies that are being made on the neuroplasticity of the brain and how the brain is adapting and rewiring itself. And it's very dependent on this. I have to confess, my biggest distraction when I try to produce something is being drawn either into news So I have this obsession of checking the news, even if I force myself, and I have only 2 outlets that I check. And one is a Romanian platform and one is CNN. I don't know why. But I force myself not to look at others. And if I'm in a library and I want to write something every 10, 15 minutes, I'm like, let me see if there's something new. And I'm actually not interested. I'm not involved in politics or whatever. But I read that there is a serotonin that is being released when you get the new, the novelty of it. Or same thing would be with Facebook. So when I was working on my PhD, I came across this fabulous book by Nicholas Carr that is called What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. And from there, I found out that if you want to work on something, you have to disconnect. You know, make sure that there is no Wi-Fi in the house for 2 weeks. Go up on the mountain to catch a signal to send the phone, but you have to disconnect to deal with the disruptions. And I mentioned our grandson. My talk more recently, when I talk about technology, I always touch on this. If I have a problem, and I'm an adult, and I'm a person that has responsibilities, and I have deadlines, and I'm a responsible mother and academic, and I get drawn, and I enter small cycles of addiction that I call. Sometimes, you know, I say, I just need to watch a movie to disconnect. What happens to the young brains that are not formed, that are not formatted? And what the literature says is that they are being formatted in these new formats. And this is why we don't recognize our students anymore. I don't know if you deal with this, but I look from the distance and I see ADHD syndrome. You know, they're like this all the time. Or they cannot not put their phone under and do something with it every 10, 15 minutes. And this has a much bigger impact on them than on us. So disruptions is a very big thing, and everyone should answer for themselves. How do I deal with it? How do I control how much I let to come over me? Then there's the information overload. When do you stop? Where is the end of it? And I mentioned already that we are drawn into it, let's say, by a sort of an addiction for information. But also, it's the information overload in our own fields. So when research is enough? When did you finalize? Because the more you look out there, the more you realize that there's more to say. And you enter this cycle of gathering more and more and more, and consuming more, and reading more, and, oh, there's something else, and I need to read that and that. And you don't give back anything. And I don't know about you, but as an academic, I always have this fear. What if I come out there and I say something that is a truism? You know, it's nothing new, and they'll say, there's nothing new with this. So it is something that we have to deal with, to decide when we draw the line. And one of the things that I try to do, if I write an article, I go and I look for information, and I try not to go over 30, 50 titles, if it's an article. 50 titles. Then I go to a library where I don't have internet access, and I try to do something with what I have. Because there is value in your added value, in your view of the literature that you found there. Even if there are many other things that others said, it's your perspective on it. And we have to find our systems of dealing with how much do we take in, how much can we take in, and when do we decide to specialize. And then obviously there's an issue of security of data. This becomes a bigger and bigger issue. As you see, the wars are now taking place on the cyberspace. In Romania, last week, there were some cyber attacks. In December, our university was attacked, and all the database with the website of our faculty and everything went down. A lot of data was lost. They just came to us and say, yeah, you have to rebuild the whole thing. I don't know what they're doing up there, but it is something that we have to be more and more aware of. And if until now our obsession was with how can I get a better, more powerful computer, how can I get the latest model, I think now we have to focus more on what is the technology that is more secure, what would be a way of securing my data, and if I invest in something, to make sure that I invest in the things that would protect my data. I mentioned that I had to do a second PhD, and as I was working on it, I had a mobility in Venice, and when I left, my husband had just bought a new Mac, a sort of a hand down from our children. And my Mac at that time, the one in the picture, was kind of old, and I said, I don't necessarily like yours because it's bigger and heavier, but I'm going to take it with me better than my other laptop, and I just transferred everything and left. Well, a week later, our house was broken into and my laptop got stolen. And I thought, if I hadn't backed up all my data, if my son hadn't just set up a cloud for me, where in the cloud, and it's a secure cloud, not a non-commercial, not Dropbox, what would have happened if all my data would have been in that computer with, I don't know, probably 2 years worth of work and so on. Now, answer the question, what happens if I lose my phone now? Not an hour from now, now. What would I lose? And I used to, when I had talks with students some years ago, I used to do an exercise that I cannot do anymore. It's not working. I would ask everybody in the room to put their phone on the table. And I did it a few times, and it was a very good exercise 3-4 years ago. And I realized when I did it the third or fourth time that actually people would not give their phones. And as some phones were there, some were ringing in the room. So I don't want to put them in that position anymore. But the point I wanted to make then was to illustrate a situation that was just found out in the press, that one priest had lost his phone, and whoever found it full of child pornography. And he was a prominent person and so on. So I started to love using mobile banking. I do all my banking from the phone. What happens if I lose it? Where are my passwords? What is my system to block everything that I lose? 2 months ago, I had my wallet stolen with everything on it. My ID, my driving license, my cards and everything. And I was, thank God it's not my phone. Because I have much more things on the phone than I had on my wallet. And that was just a matter of, a few times going to the office and having it redone. But here I have much more things. And I think we have to keep a balance of how much vulnerable we make ourselves and where we put our data. And then there's also the very big thing on privacy and the blurring of private and public life. And where is your academic profile? Where is your personal profile? And how do you handle the fact that we have all our data, all our research usually on us, and we take it home with us? And where do you put the break? What is the moment when you say, okay, my academic work is finished, now it's family time? Where do you put the line between what do students see about your life on Facebook? Because we started experimenting with this as well. If I send email to students, they wouldn't respond. If I set up a Facebook account for the group, I have them there in 30 seconds. Or you can have no Facebook if you can afford it, and it could be probably a good idea. Well, not with my field. In my field, I have to stay connected because I have to talk about it, and I suspend it from time to time, and I think I could live without it. But yeah, I had my students so that I can communicate with them, and then I saw things about them that I didn't want to see. I had a student who had her profile changed a few times because she would be blocked by Facebook. So basically, can we answer these questions regarding when do we separate life and how do we separate it, and how, where does work start and when does it stop? Because technology is everywhere.